So first off, thank you all for joining, everyone who's joining us. I'm Alex Sanchez, and I lead YouTube's work with progressive and left-of-center creators, publishers, and nonprofits. And today we brought a really great panel together of some of the internet's established and also up-and-coming progressive voices to really talk about three things: what makes for compelling digital video, lessons they've learned along the way, and how you can be using digital video to help impact public policy and opinion. And many of our panelists are independent news creators that use digital video to get the word out about the issues and topics they care about. And we get it, digital video can be really intimidating. But for every channel that has 1 million subscribers, 2 million subscribers, they all started with just one. And for us at YouTube, we're really passionate about cultivating this community and helping build the next generation of progressive news creators and media organizations. And our hope is that you leave this panel with a little bit more insight in what works in digital video and are also a little less intimidated by it. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our awesome panelists today. We have a really, really great set. I'm going to give quick intros, and then we're going to kind of get right into it. So our first panelist is fantastic. You guys know her from The Young Turks, Anna Karsvarian. She's the award-winning host and executive producer of TYT, which is also the largest progressive YouTube channel at close to 5 million subscribers, which is amazing. She's also the host of Weekends on Jacobin Magazine, which airs every Saturday at 1 p.m. And she also teaches journalism at California State Northridge. You can also find her work on CNN, The New York Times, The Hill, and other outlets. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Our next host is Brian Tyler Cohen. You guys might know Brian Tyler Cohen from his show on YouTube. He's also the host of one of the top-ranked political podcasts in the U.S. that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. His new interview series on YouTube has had Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Adam Schiff, and many others as guests, and a lot of these videos average over 250,000 views per. Andrew Yang was just on his show and recently said, if you want to talk to young people, you need to get on the Brian Tyler Cohen show, which I think is just fantastic, not a bad endorsement. So thanks so much, Brian, for being here.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah. Our next panelist is Robert Reich. He's the former Labor Secretary under President Bill Clinton from 93 to 97, and he's the current Chancellor's Professor of Public Policy at the Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley. He's also the co-founder of Inequality Media, which is a nonprofit digital media company that's focused on engaging and informing the public about inequality and imbalance of power. His explainer videos on YouTube cover topics like universal basic income, the student debt crisis, Medicare for All, and the role of media in a democracy. He's also the author of numerous books, including just released The System, Who Rigged It, and How We Fix It, and Saving Capitalism for the Many, Not the Few. So thank you so much, Robert, for being here. And then our final guest, who's fantastic, is, you guys probably seen him all over, but Roland Martin is the award-winning journalist you've seen on CNN, the Tom Dorney Morning Show, TV One, and in YouTube as part of his daily Roland Martin Unfiltered show. It's broadcasting from Washington, D.C., and he focuses on news, politics, culture, entertainment, social justice, and other important issues of the day. He has over 600,000 subscribers, and since the beginning of the year alone has added over 200,000, which is pretty incredible. He's also written a number of books, including the first, President Barack Obama's Road to the White House. So thank you for being here.
Glad to be here.
Excellent. So before we get started, you actually have the ability to ask questions of our panelists. So look for that option. It should be somewhere down below. And we're going to hold most of the questions for the end, but feel free to start submitting those now. But let's get into it. For Anna, when people think of progressive YouTube, one of the things they think about is the Young Turks. What do you think is the secret sauce that made TYT what it is today? And as an independent news creator, what do you think about your role in bringing attention to important progressive stories?
Well, let me start with the first part of your question, which is the secret sauce. You know, when you go into it, I don't think that there's any real thought about strategy, which sounds kind of funny because you would think, you know, if you want to elevate these stories, you should have a strategy in mind. But really, what I've come to realize is if there is a story that I have a passionate opinion about, and I want to analyze, I want to dissect, just that passion and that authenticity speaks to people who, quite honestly, feel neglected by other, you know, I guess, legacy platforms for delivering the news. So one other part of it, I think, is just talking about stories that are completely ignored. You know, we have an oversaturated news market. There's no question about it. And it's certainly becoming more saturated when it comes to digital platforms as well. But one thing that I have noticed is that progressive values aren't really portrayed in a lot of the news that people consume. And so we tapped into that market, not as part of a strategy, but because these are issues that we personally feel passionately about. We want to elevate these issues. We want to share an ideology that, you know, we believe is correct and would lead to much more progress in society. And so it just comes from a place of sincerity, authenticity, and being genuine. Now, one thing that I do want to also mention is that you have to ensure that you focus on things that are topical, things that individuals are searching for, topics people are searching for, in an effort to maybe bring in an audience that might not think of stories from a progressive perspective, but all of a sudden they're searching for what's Trump doing with the post office, right? Or what's happening with our healthcare system. Maybe they'll search for Medicare for all. And the goal is to be one of the first results when they look for those topics, so we can share our analysis and give people a much more progressive perspective on these issues.
Great, Anna, thank you. And I think kind of like pivoting off of that too, I think for Roland, talking about with TYT and the work that you guys have done with, and Anna, with Roland, I think for people who don't know, you've been a leader in digital media for years. So back in 2005, you were the executive editor, the Chicago Defender, and you launched an audio podcast. And a year later, you launched the first Black video podcast by a Black media organization, which for folks who are watching, 2005 is also the year that YouTube was founded. So I think like in many ways, Roland, a lot of stuff that you've been doing is very cutting edge. Understanding the digital landscape as well as you do, what do you think you need to be successful in digital? And what do you think is the key to telling a great news story or effective commentary online?
Well, I think the most important thing that you have to do is you have to be very clear in terms of what your mission is. And so, for instance, I don't consider my show to be progressive or conservative. It's Black. Now, the reason I say that is because when I look at what is missing out there, that is an explicitly in a news show that explicitly centers African Americans. I had Washington Watch on TV One for 4 years, then had News, which was a Sunday morning show, News One Now for 4 years, which was a daily morning show. And then once the Daily Show was canceled by TV One, there was nothing there. So now you have, of course, Black News Channel, but very few people even see it, even get it. So for the most part, you don't have that. And so I think what's important is to understand who you're centering. So if you are targeting women, if you're targeting a particular group among women, then that's really what you have to hone in on, because the thing is, you have to understand market fragmentation. We used to, of course, in this country, it used to all be about ABC, NBC, CBS. Cable comes along in the late 70s, and then all of a sudden begins to explode in the 80s and 90s, and now you have market fragmentation. So you could have a cable network that got 1.5 million, 2 million viewers compared to what a show got on broadcast network, and that show and network is successful. You take AMC and Mad Men. And so same thing in radio, same thing in magazines. And so you could really hone in on your niche audience and become a trendsetter in that space. And so I think that's what you really have to focus on. There were people who said, Roland, why would you do African Americans? I mean, you know, you were on CNN for 6 years and you do MSNBC and ABC. Why won't you go broad? Well, here's the problem. There are a whole bunch of people who are going broad. But if I'm able to narrow my focus and say, no, this is my sweet spot, this is my audience, then I can super serve that audience. And that's really sort of what the mentality is. And then you have to also understand how to connect with that audience and really understand historically. And so for me, being in the lineage of Frederick Douglass with the North Star, and Ida B. Wells Barnett, and Robert Abbott with the Chicago Defender, and A.I. Scott with the Atlanta Daily World, and Louis Martin with the Michigan Chronicle, John H. Johnson with Ebony and Jet, understanding that history and the role that you play, then you're able to connect with your audience where they say, oh, absolutely. So sure, we can watch these shows over here, but we know when we're looking for that very specific Black point of view, we're going to go to Roland's show, and I'm going to have the guests that also bring that perspective through.
That's super helpful. And I think, Roland, a lot of what you said, I think for folks who are just getting started and other channels on YouTube, I think is really helpful, which is kind of like know your audience, like know who you're talking to. And I think that's something that we talk to YouTube creators and other media organizations about all the time. So I think that's a really helpful point. And actually going to bring in Brian for our next point. And this actually kind of piggybacks off something that Anna had said earlier about authenticity. And I think for Brian, a lot of his videos, you take breaking news and you explain it with real clarity. And your channel has a strong progressive following, but a large chunk of your viewers are also folks that just kind of stumble upon your content. So with your channel and your work previously with Occupy Democrats, what do you think is some of the keys to persuasion, especially from a progressive point of view? And how does authenticity, like Anna said, really kind of play a part in that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm gonna echo a lot of what Anna said as well, but I think the main tool is just being honest, right? It's being able to boil down what's happening in a way that everybody can understand. So I think a lot of politics is politicians relying on people feeling too like uneducated to be able to have an opinion, right? It's relying on intimidating people. But at the end of the day, this stuff really isn't that complicated. So I don't have a magic formula for persuasion, but it's a matter of just taking a few minutes to explain to people what's going on. And I think that's like missing in a lot of political media. So for example, if somebody brings up a bill, just what's in the bill? If someone says Trump is better than Obama on unemployment, what are the unemployment figures? If someone, wants to know how much something costs, how did the CBO score it, right? Like, granted, I'm willing to do some of the legwork to make it easier, and that's worth something. But the fact is, if you're willing to give people relevant information, then all of this stuff suddenly becomes more accessible to people. So, the magic formula, the key to persuasion here is just that politics should be more accessible. And another thing is, I try to treat people like they're smart. And I feel like people appreciate that, and that's a direct contrast from this administration, right? Like Trump will just lie to people's face, like egregiously lie to people's faces. So, and shockingly enough, people don't really appreciate that. People don't want to be spoken down to. When we're told that Republicans are protecting healthcare while they're in the courts, literally trying to dismantle the ACA right now. We're told that they're protecting the environment when they're, undoing Obama-era protections against dumping toxic chemicals into streams. Like, people don't want to be told that children are not being separated at the border when kids are literally being separated at the border. So in terms of authenticity, I think a big part of my channel is just like a disdain for theatrics, right? Like the faux outrage bullshit. So I think that there was a point during the impeachment hearings, I think it was Professor Carlin, who said something about the Constitution not allowing titles of nobility. She said, like, the president can name his son Baron, but he can't make him a baron. And dear God, the pearl clutching that came after that from the right. Like, you would think that she called for the kid to be executed, right? So like, so Rashida Tlaib, I think it was Rashida Tlaib who said, impeach the mother effer. Same thing. Like, they melted down as if they'd never heard a swear word before, much less like, anything else. So, and meanwhile, like, Trump's failed response to the virus has led to 165,000 dead Americans. But if Democrats slip up on a word, then the outrage machine starts churning, and it's bullshit, and we know it's bullshit, and they know it's bullshit, and their supporters know it's bullshit, and everyone's just pretending. All right, it's theatrics, it's political theater. So I think, and that drives me out of my mind. So I think the fact that in terms of authenticity, I just hope that people would appreciate the fact that I wouldn't dish out something that I don't want to consume. So, it's just at least for my channel and the channels for everybody here. I think that what people appreciate, is the authenticity, is cutting the bullshit that we see in so much of like mainstream and legacy media.
Yep.
Can I piggyback off that a little bit? Because Tyler mentioned something that I think is so important, because I think that the media landscape and the whole definition of what it means to be a journalist is definitely changing and evolving. And so, oftentimes people think of journalists as people who are out on the field, actually gathering the information and the news. And to be quite honest with you, they absolutely do the hardest part of the job. Going out there on the field is not easy. But there is a component of media that I think is incredibly important because it helps to contextualize the issues that we're dealing with today. So what I see a lot with legacy media is this desire to kind of soundbite everything rather than giving maybe even historical context into a particular issue that's making news today. And so, some people might be under the impression that YouTube creators in the news department just read articles and regurgitate what they've read in articles. But I can say that there's a lot of time and effort that goes into the research to really put things in perspective, put things in context. And I never just read an article that summarizes a policy. I'll go out of my way to actually read the text of that legislation so I can do that story justice and ensure that the audience has all the details necessary to make their own decision about whether or not they support that policy.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And I think that's one of the things that I think people always, sometimes they always think default. It's just like regurgitating their commentary. But a lot of what you guys do in many ways is add that, it's kind of the missing link, right? You have these news stories that are coming out from more mainstream sources. And then what you guys do is you kind of debunk it, or you actually give folks the information they need to actually be able to digest it and realize like, oh, this is how I think about this issue, or this is how, these are different ways to kind of see this. Because I think it's the role that a lot of you guys play, I think is just so important, because I think like Brian said, you guys kind of call the BS out, right? You guys are the ones who in many ways are saying like, no, this is actually the media, when the media wants to go sometimes with the first, this is a quote from the president, this is exactly what it is. You guys are actually, well, let's actually go a few layers below that. And let's figure out, what does it mean if he says he's not touching Social Security, but touching payroll tax? Like, what does that actually mean? And I think those are some of the important things that you guys do. And actually, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to say one thing real quick on that. I think something that that I specifically try to avoid, and that drives me nuts about legacy media, mainstream media, is a lot of the time it looks like it's basically just that they're just glorified transcriptors. So something will happen and they will just say that it happened, or proclaim that it happened, that Trump said something, without any acknowledgement of the fact that it was a complete lie. So they'll just say Trump says this, and like, that's not your job. Like, your job is not to just transcribe something that's happened. Your job as a journalist is to do the journalism, and there's a void in that, and I think that's opened up space, for people like all of you.
Well, I'll say this here. For me, it's what I call undeniable truth. Like, for instance, so what I appreciate that Robert does is that no, we're not about to debate facts.
Right.
This is what it is. Now, what do you now want to do? And I think that's part of the problem that I have, that what mainstream often does. And again, I remember sitting on the set at CNN, and I'm sitting here going, that's a lie. So we're just going to let that lie just keep moving, and no one's going to actually call it a lie. That's also what it means, being prepared in the moment. And so that's one of the things that, when I retweet a lot of Robert's videos, is for the reason, no, these are the facts. This is the source. Now, what do you want to do?
That's exactly right. And actually, great segue, because I think I want to bring Robert into the conversation too, because I think some of the explainer videos he does are easily my favorite online. They're clear, they're concise, they take really complicated issues and they simplify it, and it does a really great job of like debunking really popular right-wing talking points. And Robert, for you, as you guys are developing content, given the swirl of the last few years and all the different things that there is to focus on, what do you decide to focus on, and what role do you think visuals play in that?
Well, it's very hard to decide what to focus on because there's so much going on at the same time. Part of it is, as Anna said, it's enthusiasm, authenticity. It's what we are passionate about. Part of it, as Roland said, is knowing your audience and trying to be responsive and sensitive to who they are and what they need. And as Brian said, you've got to, I think, be very respectful of people's intelligence, because people are curious. They want to know the truth. And they are also knowledgeable enough to know that they're not getting the truth, or at least they're not getting context. So what we essentially do every couple of days is to try to figure out what is it that people are most confused about, and how is it that we can provide history, context, meaning, and also, as Roland said, kind of a sense of what you can do about it. Because, at least our role is not just news, it's not just explanation, it's also a sense of empowerment and agency. People are feeling very weak. They are feeling sullen or despondent or despairing. And that kind of almost cynicism is a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's one of the most dangerous things for a democracy. We've got to do everything we can to empower people. You empower them with the truth, you empower them with facts, you empower them with context, but you also empower them with a sense of agency and possibility.
Alex, something that we also have to, and again, I want people, if you actually, when you're watching these networks, I want you to really pay attention. And that is, you have to understand speed. The old world was someone would say something, and then we would come back the next day and say, well, in last night's speech, so-and-so said this, and so therefore we fact check what they said. It's now too late. And so the problem is you have to be immediate, which means that you have to have the knowledge. You have to have the knowledge and the information on that particular point. I get a lot of people who, and this happened when I had my radio show on WVON in Chicago. They were like, why do you interrupt people? I said, because if they start lying, I can't let the lie continue, because if somebody is listening, they go, well, Roland didn't say anything, so I guess what they said is true. No, you have to stop the lie in its tracks. And I remember in the 2008 election, CNN just hired Eric Erickson, and it was his first night. Big time conservative at the time, redstate.com. And it was a State of the Union speech. And he goes, well, Obama didn't do this about small businesses. And I'm sitting there and it's like 20 people on set. No one saying anything. And I'm going, okay, that's a damn lie. And so I let it be known I'm ready to talk. And so I remember camera tossed to me. I said, I'm sorry, what speech were you just watching? Here's the speech. Right here, he mentioned this small business in Arizona. He mentioned this. He mentioned this. I said, please don't bring your talking points if you didn't bother listening to the speech. Folks looked at me like, oh my God, what were you doing? It was called a live fact check. And so I think what we are providing are for folks that we're not going to let the bullshit lies just slide. We're going to stop them right now so they then don't begin to gain traction. That's also why these voices matter.
Totally. And I think, like I said, so much of what you guys do is keeping these folks honest, is keeping the powerful honest, and keeping people who have large platforms honest, and making sure that you're calling them out on their stuff, which I think is so important. And actually, speaking of that, I think with Brian, I know over the last year, you've had over like 40 videos that have gotten over 1 million hits, which is insane, and is really incredible. And a lot of the folks, one thing that I think is important is, as we're thinking about these folks that are either politicians or candidates and campaigns, or even just like larger efforts, I think people really kind of think of like legacy media. Legacy media is the first thing they think of. They think, oh, we want to talk about something important. Let's go on, more of the legacy outlets. And I think, with a lot of the role that you guys have, I think you guys have such incredible reach. Can you talk a little bit about like how folks should be thinking about digital, and like how campaigns, how organizations and everybody should be kind of thinking about you guys as an important piece of getting messages out and even just debating issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think people have this mistaken impression that only young people are online, that only young people, know how to like use the computer. And granted, I've had to sit on the phone and explain to my mom how to copy and paste something. So, I think it might be easier, but the fact is that everybody is online. And I think campaigns have this, proclivity to defer first to TV or mailers just because of the power of stasis, right? Because that's what we've done in the past. And so that's what we keep having to do. The fact is, everyone is online. Digital media it's cheaper, it's more effective. When you put something online, you have instant validation in terms of whether it's effective, right? You can look at immediate metrics like shares, you can see view count. So we can pretend that TV is still the primary source of information, but I really don't think it is. I think that we have to be able to reach people where they are, and you know, candidates can do these shows. You know, not only because that's where the audience is, like we gathered people, you know, we've done the hard part, but also because this is the future of the party, right? Like progressive folks online are the thought leaders and the activists and the future politicians, campaign managers, and that should be nurtured and that should be supported by those in power. So you see, you know, how powerful young people can be from you know, the marches and demonstrations to legislators themselves. You know, I don't think anybody would doubt, you know, the effectiveness of a leader like AOC. And so knowing that, I think that the party and the campaigns and the politicians should be cognizant of the fact that you know, we're in this together. If they help lift us up, we can continue to help lift them up. You know, my guests have helped validate me. You know, like you said, I've had you know, people like Kamala Harris on and Speaker Pelosi and Adam Schiff and you know, and I'm grateful for them coming on, but I also know that now I have a responsibility to represent them and you know, the democratic values that they bring forward in a pretty serious way. So you know, I do think that there should be like a pretty wide appreciation for what we do in the digital landscape, and that and that everybody in the political space should be able to, you know, kind of nurture us the same way that the conservative sphere nurtures their digital space.
Oh, look, I'm laughing because literally I just got an email from a 76-year-old man who said, hey, how can I donate to your show? Because I watch you on YouTube. This is the first check that I got from a fan before we launched was a 92-year-old Black woman in Long Island, New York, who said, I watched you on TV One. My daughter follows you on social media because you play golf and she loves golf. And she said, your voice is important, encloses a $500 check. We need to hear your voice. A 92-year-old Black woman in Long Island, New York. And so what you're absolutely right. What is now happening is that we fall for this where I get it all the time. Well, what are your 1829 numbers? And I go, okay, these are my 1829 numbers. But you damn better pay attention to that 35 to 70 plus because they all vote too. Right. And so I think the problem is that politicians think like advertising companies. Everything is 1849 demo. That's the most important demo. And I'm going, hey, when it comes to politics, anybody who's alive, that's a potential voter.
Totally.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that real quick because I think that one of the things that legacy media gets wrong, and I want to be very cognizant of this as we make decisions moving forward, whether it be our commentary or story selections. Many politicians and legacy media outlets are concerned about access to people in positions of power.
Come on.
And so I think one of the biggest issues is that you have legacy media acting as stenographers for people in positions of power, as Tyler had mentioned earlier. You also have this issue with like softball interviews that really accomplish nothing. And so, you know, I see with independent media not everybody follows suit with this ideology, I guess, but I see a lot of independent media outlets kind of abandoning that desire to get the big names on their shows because they would rather hold politicians' feet to the fire and do honest analysis about whatever it is that these politicians are engaging in at any given moment, right? Mm-hmm. And so some people who watch our show are like, wait, we don't follow, we don't under what's going on because we'll be very critical of Speaker Nancy Pelosi. And of course, we'll be brutal toward Donald Trump, but it never comes from a place of dishonesty. It comes from a place of true political analysis. And so is Nancy Pelosi going to come on our network? Probably not. But for me and for our audience, it's much more important to be honest about her than to puff her up with the hope of getting her on our show. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not saying that you do that, Tyler. I haven't seen your interview with her, but I'm just saying, generally speaking, historically speaking, with legacy media, they don't ask the tough questions, and there's a specific reason for that.
Yep.
If I can just talk about legacy media for a second, I think for so long, all we had was legacy media, right? And right-wing media had convinced everyone that regular media was working for the Democrats. And so there was this false equivalency that was created. And it was false because legacy media isn't working for the Democrats, right? Maybe the truth has a liberal bias, but that doesn't mean NBC or CBS are left-wing organizations. But Fox News is working for the Republicans. There's a literal revolving door between Fox News and the White House. So, that is a propaganda network. And that's where the false equivalency lies, because everyone assumes that because Fox is right, then, CBS, NBC, ABC, they must be left. But they're not, right? So while Fox is happy to repeat Trump's talking points, the mainstream media is out here falling over itself to prove that they're independent. That's why we have Benghazi. Benghazi was a complete bullshit right-wing fabrication. So the New York Times can say, look, we cover both sides. We're not liberal, and it's a massive overcompensation. So what you're left with is right-wing media, which is happily and unabashedly right-wing. And then there's the so-called liberal media, which falls over itself to show that they're not liberal. And that's what we get. Like that's who we got on our side, a media ecosystem that is so desperate to prove to everybody that they're not liberal. So right wing has right wing, and left wing has a media ecosystem that doesn't even like the left wing. So I think that's
false
why
equivalencies. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why that's why there's such an appetite for true progressive media, because for so long we've been fed this idea that because that the best we've got is like the New York Times. And meanwhile, you look at during the end of the 2016 election, when you couldn't find a day where Benghazi wasn't on the front cover of the New York Times. And like, that's not progressive media.
I want to just go back to something that Roland said before about progressive versus non-progressive, or what is actually the meaning of progressive. I think that we are no longer, and I can't speak for all of the rest of you, but I can speak for a lot of us, we are no longer thinking of ourselves as purely progressive. The debate today, the underlying contest, is between democracy and fascism. And let's be very clear about this. A lot of the money, a lot of the wealth is coming from a very small group of people. We are back to an oligarchy of the same sort that we had in this country in the 1890s. That money and that wealth is flooding social media. It's flooding the Republican Party. A lot of it's flooding the Democratic Party. The big corporations and Wall Street flooding the Democratic Party. And right now, they are putting the full court press on in terms of trying to get their story, their narrative out about why the country is divided or what the issues are. I think it's our responsibility to uphold democracy, democratic values. This is not about progressivism versus non-progressivism or conservatism. This is about what we have to do as a nation to preserve democracy.
Alex, you asked early on, what's the secret sauce? How do you grow it? How do you build this? And something, I didn't hear it. I was not a member of the National Association of Black Journalists when this happened. I joined in 1989. But in 1988, at Howard University, Max Robinson, the first African-American nightly news anchor, gave a speech to students and alumni. He was gaunt, he was dying of AIDS, and he stood in front of them and said, never ever lose your integrity or your credibility, because in the end, that's all you've got. And I remember reading that story, and that thing is seared into my mind. The second thing that is seared into my mind is this line from the nation's first Black newspaper, Freedom's Journal, in March of 1827, where they wrote, "We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us." The last one that I carry, which drives all of this, if you saw the movie The Insider, Lowell Bergman, producer of 60 Minutes, played by Al Pacino, he says, Lowell Bergman in 60 Minutes, one of my calls get returned, that's not the end of my name. What people have to understand is that we have allowed CNN, ABC, NBC, MSNBC, That's the validators. You're not legitimate unless you've been on those networks. I literally had Black people telling me, when was I going to get me a show? I said, I'm on TV One every morning. They said, no, a real show. I'm like, what the hell do you mean a real show? They said, oh, I mean like on CNN or MSNBC. They didn't even realize we did the show from NBC News Channel. I said, do you realize I literally sit in the exact same seat that Brian Williams sits in and Rachel Maddow sits in when they come to DC? The same set, the same cameras, the same fiber line we send it down. But they perceived us as being second class. Now that's a value of white supremacy in terms of how Black folks have been treated. The point I'm making is this here. Put on a professional production. It needs to look good. It needs to sound good. It needs to have quality guests. But as long as you're in a pursuit of truth, your audience will say, I'm a ride with you. Because when they say, I can't trust you, that's when they won't tune in. And so if you carry that banner, the banner of truth, as Anna said, doesn't matter how we're going to cut this. Democrats, you screw up, I'm going to tag your ass. Republicans, I'm going to tag you as well. That is how we have to be operating. And when you do that, that audience begins to build, because we're in the age of, people are saying, I need somebody who I can trust, who's not going to bullshit me. And that's, I think, where we are.
Totally. And just for looking at time right now, I just want to remind folks who are watching that we still have Q&A, so feel free to submit questions if you guys have any that you guys are thinking. We're going to continue on for a little while, but I want to make sure that we're being responsive to questions that you guys might be having. I guess next question I have really quickly is actually kind of like tying a lot of this together. I think for Bob's group, a lot of your organization is like really focused on making an equitable society. And this is something that I think for a lot of the creators that we have to get together today is also a shared goal. And my question to you is, what role does Inequality Media or other progressive creators have in kind of bringing about the change they want to see, and how do you do that?
Well, I think this is all about power. It really, the biggest change over the past 50 years in this country, honestly, is that we used to have more distributed power. Black people and women were still second-class citizens, obviously, but we had a large and growing middle class, large and growing working class. We had people who were forming unions, and the trade unions were large. We had cooperatives. We had the beginnings and the strengthening civil rights movement. We had power that was not concentrated as it is right now. And I think that our responsibility, what we think of as our responsibility, is to enable people to see how they can get power, how they can join with others in terms of creating power for themselves, mobilizing and energizing and activating a lot of grassroots groups and putting them together. We really now in our society have to get very serious about something that we called years ago countervailing power. Big corporations and the financial sector of our economy have so much power over the media, over what we see, what we do, over politics, that unless we actually foster countervailing centers of power, we are not going to be able to change anything. I mean, everything else we want, every idea, every particular policy proposal, Green New Deal, racial justice, ending police brutality, you name it, doesn't have a chance of actually getting done unless people are organized and mobilized. And so I personally don't see this as radically different from seeking the truth. I see this as one aspect of achieving a society that is a just society, and also along the way making sure people know what is happening and why it's happening and what they need to do to bring about social change.
That's awesome. And I think like one of the things that I think is important is for us to be able to bring more voices into this conversation and bring more voices online. And my next question is actually going to be for Anna. And one of the things that I know with TYT is very passionate about elevating new voices. And a few months ago, you guys launched TYT Academy, which is a new effort to teach local journalists how to use digital video effectively and really kind of bring about change in their communities. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that effort and what you see not only as the future of local news, but also political commentary online.
So I think it's actually a really great opportunity to train people to do journalism on a national level if they choose to, but also on a hyper local level. You know, local news has been gutted throughout the country, and it's so important for people to have the ability to not only consume local news, but also to feel empowered enough and educated enough on the technological components of digital media to engage in gathering and reporting the news. So TYT actually has two individuals who are heading that program. And I think that these particular people really do make sense. We have Jonathan Larson, who has a lot of experience in investigative reporting. He's actually the editor of our investigative reporting team. And he's the one who broke a story about Pete Buttigieg and how he fired the first African-American police chief in South Bend, Indiana. That was a really big story. So he has the knowledge necessary to really train people on how to do effective journalism. And then the other person who's working on that is the head of our publishing department, Aaron Wysocki, who has a great deal of experience in SEO, how to publish your videos in a way that will, you know, get some eyeballs on it. Because one thing that I think needs to be discussed a little bit is how you can have the absolute best content, but you also really need to understand how to make your content as visible as humanly possible.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you know, people don't end up seeing your content. And so I think that's a really great team. And based on what I know about it, it's going to start with a relatively small group of people. It's very, you know, hyper concentrated on ensuring that people get the most out of it. You know, I don't want people to be like swamped with like 100 students, but I think this is just a great idea. And I'm glad that Google helped to launch this type of project, because we want to empower people to be independent journalists and not rely so much on trying to get their way in the door with like a legacy media outlet where they might actually end up finding themselves very disappointed. I know that's what happened to me when I graduated college, and my very first job was for a CBS News affiliate. And I was like, this is not for me. I want something more. And I realized that independent journalism was what gave me a little more freedom to speak about issues that I cared about.
Alex, I want to expound on that particular point. You have to be intentional. And when I say intentional, you have to, first of all, it's important to be a student of this business. You know, I had the fortune of going to a magnet school of communications in Houston, Jack Case High School. So I've been living this and breathing this since I was 14 years old. I mean, this is what I chose to do. And when I say be intentional, it's also just understanding the landscape. We launched Washington Watch on TV One in 2009 because CNN would not give me a weekend show. So I was still with CNN. And then when I left, Jeff Zucker comes in 2013. I leave in April 2013. We launched News One Now. I was very intentional in who I was seeing on cable news and the opportunities that people were not getting. So I purposely used my show to cultivate a whole new generation of Black talent. So when you turn on right now, so when you see Angela Rye on CNN, Angela came through my show. April Ryan's first paid contributor job was on my show, Washington Watch. When you see even Republicans, Chris Metzler, Shamichael Singleton, Paris Denard was on. Laura Coates, I love seeing Laura now hosting shows on CNN. She hosted my show first. I can show you 30 different people. And what was interesting is that people would hit me and they would say, Roland, CNN just hired another one of your panelists. I said, I'm good, because I'm going to find me somebody else. I actually tweeted one day. I said, Jeff Zucker, you can hire every single Black person who comes through my show. It's okay. I'm going to go find an entire new crew and bring them in. If y'all hire them, I'm going to go find an entire new crew. The reason I'm saying that is by doing that, now all of a sudden, all of these Black voices that you're now seeing when Paul Butler's doing legal commentary on MSNBC, they weren't calling him in 2009, 2010. He was on my show, Washington Watch. So we actually, with these platforms, we can actually serve as the fertile ground to teach people how to do television, to teach them how to do commentary and analysis. And then when other people, trust me, legacy media, they're watching all of our shows because I've plucked out people they would never call, and all of a sudden they start appearing. And so that's how you can also change the game, but it's intentional. That was very intentional, whether they were progressive or even conservatives. And so that's why when I see my man Gianno Caldwell and I see him on Fox News, I always tell Gianno, you might want to give a brother a shout out because you know where you got your start first. That has to be also our mindset, how we can actually change what they look like by the people who come through our shows.
Totally. And there's actually a question from the audience that kind of asks, this is for a question for the panel, but is kind of related. And this is from Albert Garcia. And he says, a lot of the best potential pundits of color or from impacted community never make it to screen in traditional or non-traditional media. How can we all together increase opportunities for folks to both get the experience and time to bring a perspective, different perspective? Do folks have thoughts on that?
I just answered it. So anybody else go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit for me. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So the question from Albert Garcia, and Roland just kind of touched on this a little bit, is saying, you know, how do we get increased opportunities for folks, both pundits of color and folks from impacted community, to have the ability to bring a different perspective to the screen?
So I have different methods of doing that. What I like to do is find, like-minded individuals who are trying to start out their own shows. I'll watch a lot of their content and decide, this person deserves to be elevated. They are good at what they do. It's just that they're small. They just started out. And so we'll bring them on as guests. I'll ask them if they're willing to be a guest host on a day when Cenk Uygur is out. And a recent example of that was Wosny Lambre, who I had actually met through a friend of mine, Michael Brooks, who had his own show, The Michael Brooks Show. He just tragically passed away. But Wosny was great. And, he's Haitian. He has a perspective on politics. He mostly specializes in sports. But I noticed through his tweets that he has a lot of strong opinions on political issues. So I just decided one day, hey, Cenk's going to be out. Are you willing to come on and just be my co-host? And he was fantastic. So I think it's just being open to other individuals who are trying to get to where you're at, who are trying to do their own thing, who really do believe in independent journalism, and helping them out as much as you can. I'm not one of these people who wants all this fame and glory. To me, what's important is elevating a message that I think is really underserved in legacy media. And so, if you guys come across people that you think would be great, definitely send them my way and I'll watch their content.
That's awesome. And we're running close on end of time right now. I think we only have a few more minutes. So just want to ask one kind of question for the entire panel. Would love to kind of get your thoughts on, for a lot of the folks who are kind of watching right now in the audience, they might be working for nonprofits. They might be working for media organizations. They might be trying to start their own media organizations in some ways. And one of the questions that I have for all of you is, in your careers and kind of getting to the point where you guys are today, what's something that you wish you kind of knew, or what advice do you have for folks who are kind of getting started in digital? And what's something you wish you knew when when you first started?
I would say, I would say just to do it, and whatever idea you have, just like, put pen to paper, so to speak, even though there's neither pen nor paper. But I spent almost a year like waffling and watching political commentary from other people and saying like, oh, I could do that. I could do that. I could do that. And I just never did because, I didn't have the right setup or the right camera or the right background or the right anything, you know what I mean? Like, didn't have a teleprompter. And so I had all these obstacles that I decided were preventing me from actually just doing it. And eventually when I did, you learn so much quicker than if you had than what you, the obstacles that you face are way different than what you told yourself before are going to be the ones that you're going to face. So, and you can fix that, like once you actually start putting content up, you can see what works, you can see what didn't work, but you won't know what those things are until you've started, and until you've published your first video. And like Alex said before, I mean, I every single one of us was in the same space. I was publishing videos for like 40 people, and then the next week it was 50, and then it was 75, and then it was 150. So, and you eventually get to where you want to be, but I would just say, just start putting something up and it's not going to be good and you're going to probably hide it later, like I did for all of my early videos, and that's fine, but like, you know, you got to start somewhere to get somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. You know, the other advice that I would give people is actually not related to producing the content, but more importantly, how you can kind of protect your own health and your own mind while you do this, because this type of content, I think, very understandably can have some impacts on your happiness, your perspective on society or humanity. And so make sure that you surround yourself with good people. Make sure that you take care of your mental health and you give yourself some space from this work. Because I can tell you, even when Trump wasn't in office, there are days when you feel incredibly discouraged yourself and you kind of want to give up, right? It's okay to be honest with your audience about that, by the way. I think that comes along with the authenticity. They feel as if you are, you know, part of their family. And honestly, I see our audience as part of the family. So it's good to be honest with them. But at the same time, you do need to find a good balance between the work that you're doing, the content that you're publishing, and, you know, just kind of giving yourself a break to allow your mind to rest so you're energized and ready to go for the next news day.
I would say, in addition to all of that, it's very important to maintain a moral vision. What is this that you're trying to do? What's the purpose of all of this? Don't be seduced merely by the numbers, or how many viewers you have, or how successful in very, very narrow and superficial terms. The question is really, are you doing something that you feel, even in a small way, is the right thing to do at this point in time, changing society toward a concept of social justice, when people are so disturbed and cynical, and many people are really at the point where they despair. I mean, we have not been in a society that has had a Trump, an authoritarian running it, in a pandemic where 166,000 people have died, in a depression, economic depression, where 35 to 40 million people don't have jobs. I mean, think of what we are doing and the importance of what we are doing in terms of trying to get people the truth and context and history and agency. This is a moral occupation. This is a moral purpose. Don't forget that.
I would say this here, the two words: purpose is first. What Robert said is absolutely on point. In December of 2017, when Alfred Liggins, the CEO of Urban One, called me in to tell me, I was told that they were going to take the show from a 5-day-a-week show to a weekly, but he made the decision to end the show completely. As he was talking, I was already saying, I'm going to call this person, this person, this person. There hasn't been one day where I've actually been sad the show got canceled, because I was already saying, no, this is what's going to happen. Tom Jones was retiring in December of 2019. I said we have to have a significant platform that reaches Black people for the 2020 election. That was purpose. So I never fretted. I had people like, Roland, aren't you upset? No, because I'm focused on moving forward, because I understood exactly what I was trying to do. But the second thing is, to anybody who wants to do, you have to study. And when I say study the craft, study the medium. People have no idea. I study Young Turks. When I say study, I'm looking at shows. I'm looking at graphics. I'm looking at, wonder what camera is this here? Are they shooting 60 frames per second or 30 frames per second? I'm looking at what other people are doing. I'm looking at how their apps are set up, how the website is set up. I'm looking at how they did this. I wonder how many crews that they use. Are they using lavalier? Are they using boom microphones, DLSRs? Are they using traditional cameras? And so once you begin to immerse yourself in this, and then when you're ready to make that jump, now you have a real clear understanding of then what is required. And then once you're in it, you're constantly sitting here learning and doing more. And what's the next piece of equipment? And how can I be lighter? How can I be faster? How can we make this easier? If you don't do that, then what you're actually doing is a disservice to the craft. Great directors, great artists, great rappers, I don't care who they actually are students of their craft. You have to be a student of this craft and then begin to say, now let's go.
Roland, I think that is so perfect. And I think we're at time, and what an incredible way to end this panel. And I just want to say to all of you, thank you guys all so much for joining. A big thank you to all the panelists. If you don't follow their channels, you should definitely be following their channels, subscribe and like. But thank you guys all for being here, and just really appreciate all the stuff that you guys all do. And that's a wrap. That's all we've got. Thank you guys.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Alex.
it.
Thanks so much.
All right, take care, guys.